I'm Chris Dreger, and I'm a painter, and I'm also a teacher, a college instructor at WSU Vancouver currently. I've also taught at Clackamas Community College and Portland Community College and the Art Institute of Portland when it was around. And I've taught traditional art, drawing, painting, drawing in many forms, perspective landscape drawing, figure drawing, as well as comic art drawing. At Clackamas Community College specifically. At PCC, I was in the digital multimedia department, so I taught video compositing and special effects, and I've worked in the area, in the Portland area, in post-production, mostly special effects and compositing for things like stop motion animations and other sorts of things where live action things where effects were needed, like the Grimm TV show. I worked on the pilot of that back in the day. And I currently teach at the DTC department at WSU Vancouver, which is the Digital Technology and Culture department. And so I teach mainly digital multimedia design there, and as well as UI UX, which is user interface and user experience, as well as 2D animation from time to time. And I hope to be teaching, say, stop motion animation again. I've taught that at PCC. So I've been painting since I was about 12 years old. I first got into it basically with a French teacher in junior high who got us all into the Impressionists. So that was a great introduction to that. And then I discovered that my mom had a old painting kit, an oil painting kit with oil paints and brushes and things that she had fooled around with back in the 1950s. And so, and I actually still have some of those brushes and the original case for that. So those things can last quite a long time. But I got into painting that way. I started painting oils, and then I was especially drawn to portraiture. I grew up doing a lot of doodles from Mad magazines. So like Mort Drucker is one of my favorite artists. He was the one who did the caricatures from movies, basically. So movie spoofs and satires. And that was a great inspiration, and I kind of learned to draw faces from copying Mad magazines. Yeah, and so I continue to paint. I still paint portraits, still lifes, landscapes, some abstract stuff sometimes. I've been getting into a lot of some other mediums as well, like glow-in-the-dark pigments, which is an interesting sort of side thing. Unfortunately, it's very impermanent, meaning that the glow-in-the-dark pigments will lose their power and their glowability, their luminosity, after a few months or a few years, which is unfortunate. So you can't really produce lasting work with glow-in-the-darks or fluorescence, unfortunately, but I'm always drawn to those kind of colors. I've also played around with encaustic, which is mixing wax in with oil and varnish typically, which is a very interesting and difficult medium to do because you have to do it on a hot plate while the wax is hot. So it's a little bit challenging. Not as easy as acrylic or oil, which I find to be very easy. So yeah, past few years I've been drawn to painting Oregon, Washington landscapes. So I've been going out and doing plein air painting, meaning that I go out and I set up my easel and I usually paint the painting within one sitting. This one actually is a good example of that. This was up by the Stonehenge recreation up in Washington by Goldendale. And the view from there, the Stonehenge is actually not in the painting itself because it was difficult to arrange that. But it's a great view from there. And so basically I set up and paint. I paint rather quickly sometimes, so I can knock out a painting in about 3 or 4 hours. Typically. Sometimes there's a little bit of retouching after the fact. But I really like drawing from life, painting from life, because there's so much information in real life that you can't get from, say, photographs. Even if you take your own photographs and you take a lot of photographs, it's not the same as being there. Photography really limits the amount of colors that you're seeing actually of a scene, as well as you don't have the binocular vision perspective, and you can't move your head around and move your body around to see around objects and things. So I really enjoy painting from life. I've also been painting some still lives. In the last few months I've been doing some old shoe paintings. So I'm really drawn to old, I guess, old worn out shoes have a lot of character to them and a lot of love in them, as well as a lot of abuse because of course they're the things you walk on. So I find it a really fascinating kind of subject matter to paint. I would say about the most misunderstood thing about oil and acrylic painting is that people think it's hard or harder than, say, watercolors. And I think that's completely the opposite. Watercolors are very difficult because they're completely unforgiving. You can't paint over your mistakes very easily, if at all. And so you have to work it up in a way where everything is going to be visible in the end. Oil and acrylic, you can scrape things off, you can paint over things, you can wait till these things dry and then just paint over the top of something. You can totally fix your mistakes even years down the line. I find that to be very easy about oil and acrylic painting. Especially acrylic painting is super easy because it can be treated like watercolors, so you can paint it like watercolors by thinning it out, or you can paint it like oils and paint really thick with it and opaquely with it. And then oils just have a sort of a natural beauty to them that even if you do something that's not the greatest, just the material itself is so beautiful and so luminous that it sometimes gives you great results even when your own work is not that great. I guess another thing that I'd like to point out that people don't understand about painting and why it's really important to see paintings in real life is that the colors that are used in artist pigments are not the same that are found on your computer screen or in prints, in books or posters. And those are much more limited in terms of their intensity. So you really have to go to a museum, to a gallery to appreciate the artwork in its original form. Because again, anytime you take a picture of it or you try to translate that into something else, some other medium like a computer or a print, it's just not going to have the same impact and it's not going to have the same colors. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. They buy a new computer monitor and you have billions or trillions of colors, quote unquote, but it's really just 3 colors, red, green, and blue, and trillions of variations of those 3 colors. And it's nothing like what you get with true oil or acrylic paintings or watercolors. And then also with that, it's surprising that there's a very limited number of true pigments out there that we can use, because many of them are what we call fugitive, meaning that they're going to fade over time. So you really want to use paints that are not going to fade over time. And so these are typically from minerals, or synthetically made in a lab. But all the colors the beautiful colors that we see in nature, typically with flowers, vegetables, even things like that, those are unable to be made into paint that's going to last at all because they will fade over time, which is really unfortunate. Usually people look at a painting and look and comment on the subject matter, the scene or the things in there. Or if it's abstract, people will try to see imagery in the abstractness. It's funny, going through art school, you're really taught a lot about the abstract elements, the geometry, the flat geometry of the picture plane, things like the golden section, the inner square, all these old Greek and Renaissance ideas, as well as the geometry of the 3D-ness of it, how it goes into space. And then how the color relates to either real color or exaggerated color, things like that. So yeah, I guess usually I wish that people would talk more about the abstract elements or ask me about the abstract elements and how that works with the subject matter, right? Because it's not just the subject matter or just the abstract elements, but it's how those things work together to make an interesting composition or an interesting picture. I wish that was the case in museums too. Like when I go to museum shows, there's a lot of information about the artist's friends, their wives or husbands, or what was going on in their lives at the time, what was going on in history at the time, but not so much about like what they were really thinking about the abstractness of what they were doing and why they were doing it. Right. That's definitely not entirely the case, but a lot of museum shows, I think, focus too much on the lifestyle of the painter as opposed to what their work is actually about. It's a subject I've always wanted to do, and I never got around to doing shoes, and specifically old worn out shoes. And it was really inspired by a Van Gogh, where he did a painting of a pair of boots. So that's where the inspiration comes from. And I was really happy the way it turned out because there's just a lot of character in shoe wear. And it's funny that shoes are a place where in a typical, I don't know how to put it, conservative way of dressing, shoes can be a total outlier to that, right? Especially sneakers. Sneakers are really crazy in terms of their designs and colors. And most people wouldn't ever wear those colors and those designs on the rest of their body, but they're perfectly okay to wear those on their feet. So I find that to be really fascinating. The fact that shoes, are kind of with you all the time. They're the soles of your body, I guess, the soles of your shoes, the soles of your feet. They're the things that take the most abuse in terms of everyday wear and tear of life. And they're the most utilitarian, and they're also the most life-saving. If you're out in the woods, you really need a good pair of hiking boots to survive the woods. And if you're walking across gravel or hot pavement, you really need the right shoes, right? So I find those to be really fascinating, and especially old, worn-out shoes, because I think these are the things that, I had a painting teacher, Robert Durista, who used to say that, like Rembrandt painted his old mother as opposed to a young model, because there's something about the humans love about something that is aged and used and loved, right? And that's kind of unique, which is why people love antiques and things, why people spend their lives looking for old signs and useless stuff that just has history, right? It shows something that's outside of yourself and that has lasted through the ages in a way. So that's why I find that really fascinating. I like them specifically too, like I have this, that thing behind them is actually a kind of a light box that was mainly sold for light therapy, but I really love illumination. So I've always been drawn to painting light sources. In the past, I used to paint a lot of lamps. I still do from time to time, but lamps are almost like they're a sense of illumination. They almost have a personality to them, like a person. They're a thing. They have character to them. And that kind of glow is really fascinating in terms of trying to paint that glow. Because I think one of the most interesting things about a painting is light, right? And trying to get that sense of light. In fact, I had a photography teacher in college also who said that, photography means painting with light, the actual meaning of the word. And so he's like, as long as your photograph is about light, it's going to be a good photograph. So it's not about the subject matter so much, but it's about the light that's happening with the subject matter. That's a pretty recent one. I did that about a month ago or so from the Mount St. Helens Visitor Center. There was a nice view of that. It's unusual for a painting that I've done because there's no elements that cross over diagonally, really, I guess, except for the slopes of the mountain. But it's very much of a, there's a bar of the foreground, the river, the background trees, the background mountains, then the furthest back mountain, and then the sky. So it's a very kind of linear sort of painting. But I was really happy with it. It was, again, a one-session painting, and I was really happy with how I nailed the colors and how I got it to be a very unified kind of flow that I don't always get in all of my paintings. So it was very satisfying for that reason. One of the paintings that didn't make the show that I decided against, well, there's only so much room here, but there's just some things about that. That was like a 2-session or 3-session painting. So I went out to that location 3 times, and there's just still some things about that painting that I didn't quite nail. And I had to go back at the same time of day, 3 days in a row, to try to get it. But in any case, it's it's funny when trying to decide when a painting is done and when a painting is not done, because you can work on a painting forever, right? But then you're going to kill some of the initial beauty and freshness of it, So it's a hard thing. So the one that didn't make it, I did a companion piece to that. It was almost going to be a diptych, the one on the far right there. And that I basically did the second one, which is the upper right one there, from across the river, so from the other side of the Clackamas River. And that one, probably because it was smaller, it was much more easy to come together as a unified piece. And I was able to do that in one sitting as opposed to several sittings of the other one. And I also exaggerated the colors more. So as opposed to trying to really nail the colors that I was seeing, which isn't always possible, again, because of the choice of the availability of pigments that you need. But I was really happy with the way that that one turned out in terms of the personality of the bridge itself. I was really trying to get the character of that bridge because it's a very unique bridge. I think it won a award back in 1934 for the most beautiful steel bridge of the year. So it's a really nice bridge, and the Art Deco-ness of the columns that hold up the bridge, the cement parts, are very unique. And so I was really happy with that one. Well, for the most part, it would be really boring not to have any art. You know, art fills our lives, whether it's just decoration or whether it's something more significant in terms of a picture, a photograph, or a painting. And music, of course, is always around. So I think for one thing that art gives more of an objective perspective. It allows us to step back from life and look at it as a picture, you know, like or a piece of it as a picture. So it allows us to get an aesthetic distance from reality, which can be good because you can then get a more universal or objective way of looking at life. And I think that's really important, an important aspect of art. Yeah, I mean, there's so many reasons why art is important. And there's also so many reasons why art is unimportant, right? I used to have a painting teacher who said that, you know, you think your painting is important. He's like, did you ever live through a garbage strike in a major metropolitan city? He's like, that's disgusting. He's like, you need the garbage man to take the garbage away. It's like, that's an important function of society. Without that, your life is trash, like literally trash. And that could be more important than being a painter and producing a good painting, because that's what society runs on, right? Same thing with, like, you know, food production, right? It's like, if you can have great art, if you don't have good food, you know, you're not gonna have the patience to pay attention to great art. So there's a lot of things that come before art, but art is a way that defines the culture and defines your time of being on the earth. I guess, too, the only other thing I'd like to say is that just the aesthetic experience in and of itself, looking at a piece of art that stops you in your tracks and takes you, I don't want to say it's escapism, but it takes you away from your day-to-day concerns and hopefully puts you in a higher state of mind. That's important for everyone, I think, because it gives your life meaning. Yeah, I would like to thank my wife. She's super supportive of my painting and often sits out in locations while I'm painting, trying to do something interesting. So I really thank my wife. I thank my mother for getting me started in painting, and that's a portrait of my mother up there. And my grandfather next to her father, who actually enabled me to go to art school in the first place. So it was some of his money or most of his money that enabled me to go to actual college and get an art degree in the first place. So I'd like to thank those three people, basically.